Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,251st day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To join our conversation, you can call toll-free from the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-888-2292, or for the terminally timid, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com, and it'll come up right up there on the monitor, and I'll be able to see it. Also, remember to check out our Facebook, Justin TV, and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. I'm wearing my red, white, and blue shirt today because of the Republican convention, but I guess before we get to that, we ought to look at the big clock on the Truth and Lies Radio's FATCA/Taxmageddon countdown page. This counts down to the day your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire, which is in 123 days, 12 hours, 51 minutes, and 3 seconds. Well, everybody is all excited about the Republican convention, and having watched Republican conventions for 48 years, I can tell you that I'm terribly bored. I have to say, the high point of the convention was, for me thus far, has been the fact that someone in the GOP must be listening to Truth and Lies Radio because they copied one of my show's major themes and unveiled a giant debt clock at their convention to measure the red ink of the government will accumulate during the 4-day event. Republicans are giving the $16 trillion debt an unprecedented top place in their presidential campaign because they believe it's one of the strongest issues to use against President Obama, who's seen the debt rise dramatically in his 4 years. Now, that's fair, but it would be equally fair for the Democrats to put up a debt clock because the Republicans have voted for an awful lot of corporate welfare, an awful lot of wasteful military expenditure, and a big chunk of that national debt is theirs as well. Now, I admit that most of my life I have voted Republican probably 90% of the time. When I was younger, it was easier because there were Southern Democrats who were conservatives. Now, there's hardly a Democrat left south of Mason and Dixon's line that isn't a communist. So as I got older, it became harder and harder and harder. It was great in the old days in Florida when we elected the 7 members of the state cabinet because we had Doyle Connor as Commissioner of Agriculture. I think he was first appointed when Andrew Jackson was military governor of Florida. I'm not sure, but he'd been there forever, and he was a solid conservative, so I could vote for him. Because I hate voting straight party because I'm not a Republican. I'm a Christian libertarian. I'm a conservative libertarian, whatever you want to call it. I don't believe in big government, and I don't trust either of the parties. I've got to tell you that as much as the Republican Party accuses the Democrats of tokenism, a review of their schedule of speakers shows that the Republicans have a black belt, a top degree black belt in tokenism as far as racially, religiously, and everything else. I went through the schedule and I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. I mean, let's just start with religions. We want to make sure that no one's offended and everyone's included. Now, that's great. It would be great if it were natural, but it is so freaking obvious that I just want to throw up. Okay, the first day we have the invocation is by a rabbi, Mazel Tov. Then at the end of that first day, the benediction is by a Hispanic Protestant minister. Great. Wednesday starts out with an invocation by a Sikh. That's S-I-K-H, head priest. That's a little interesting. I don't know how big the Sikh community is in the United States, but I guess there must be a lot of Republicans because they raided one. And ended with a benediction by an Eastern Orthodox archbishop, which I guess I would be happy to see if I cared about this stupid tokenism in which the United States is involved. At least it looks like they're trying to get Orthodox votes. Then on Thursday, the invocation's done by Mormon clergy. And later on, you have remarks by a Mormon bishop. And then it ends, interestingly, both conventions, the Democrat and the Republican convention, both end with a closing benediction by the same person, Archbishop Timothy M. Dalton of the Roman Catholic Church. So they're fighting for the Roman Catholic vote. I mean, this is just amazing, but it gets sicker. That was just the religious part of it. They've gone through to cover almost every group. They've got Janine McDonald, an Iraqi war veteran. They have a Coast Guardsman who is disabled and is a para-Olympian. The only group to which they did not pander with their speaking list are one-eyed, peg-legged, gay Lithuanian Anabaptists. But we'll talk about that and the tokenism and the screw job Rand Paul got when we come back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer with more Truth. Well, we're back, and I was talking about the schedule and the speakers, the people that are displayed at the Republican National Convention. I've already provoked a reader response. Quote, I think the gay Lithuanian Anabaptist is speaking tonight. However, he has sight out of both eyes, and while in a wheelchair, he has no prosthetic. So, I don't know. Maybe I missed something. I'll tell you, this is really so ridiculous. It's done to make sure that there isn't any possible group that's left out. I suppose if they could have gotten an unborn baby to somehow speak from out of the uterus via some kind of what do you call it? Stethoscope connection. They would have had he or she appear as well. I mean, they have the wife, the First Lady of Puerto Rico, which isn't even a state. They've got her as the one who introduced Mrs. Romney. They've got black, they have white, they have Asian, they have lots of Hispanics. They're doing this. This is tokenism. This is all baloney. It's all smoke and mirrors and does not mean one damn thing except tokenism. I mean, the Ron Paul campaign thought they got a good deal at some point. The campaign manager for Ron Paul. No wonder Ron Paul didn't win more, because this guy obviously, when it gets into the infighting, is no damn good. His negotiation for giving up a whole bunch of seats that Ron Paul won was, there was a Ron Paul video. Ron Paul didn't get to speak, of course. There was a Ron Paul video and remarks made by Senator Rand Paul, which were quite good, but they were at between the 7 and 8 o'clock hour. The video came right after the invocation by the Sikh high priest, and with no disrespect to the Sikhs, I just somehow don't think that's a real great lead-in or a real draw. I don't think Sikhs around the world, or undecided Sikh American citizens, were tuning in to watch their head priest give the invocation, so they watched the Ron Paul video. Then he was introduced by the senior Republican senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, and Rand Paul gave his remarks. They also misrepresented. I'm sorry, but Janine McDonald, the Iraq war veteran Fine. She served in the Iraq War. Christopher Devlin Young, I have great empathy for him. He's a Paralympian. He's disabled. But they had him as wounded warrior, is what it said across the television. The problem was that isn't true. He's a disabled Coast Guard veteran who was injured on duty, but the Coast Guard is not part of the military except in wartime when it's called up and serves as part of the Navy. This is a little fact they forgot because they don't know anything about how the government runs. They just know how to produce events, spectaculars that have nothing to do with reality. Then we start the 8 o'clock hour with remarks by Senator John McCain, one of the craziest men in the United States Senate. 25 years ago when I was in Washington, his own staffers said to me, "We hope to God this guy is never elected president. He's insane." But he was speaking. And then 8 o'clock, which would have been a better hour than 7 o'clock, we get the attorney generals of the state of Florida and the state of Georgia. Now, that's very nice, but they get a better place than Rand Paul. Come on. This was all a joke. The whole thing's a joke. They all come in with the flags are brought in every day. Everybody pledges allegiance. Somebody sings the national anthem. You find somebody else to pray. You get everybody to say a few words. And every time there's a black person, the camera zooms in on him to make sure you see that it is, the Republican Party is really open and welcoming everyone. Yeah, well, when you believe in nothing, you'll fall for anything. I mean, one of the people who got a better time slot, for example, than Rand Paul was Jane Edmonds. Now, that's a name that just trips off everyone's tongue, right? Everyone knows Jane Edmonds, correct? Hell, I don't know who she is. I checked. She's the former, not even current, former Massachusetts Secretary of Workforce. So what? There were remarks by a former Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor Kerry Healy. So what? Anybody who might detract slightly, is pushed into a bad time zone. Now, Ron Paul's people have been treated so badly by the Republican Party that Representative Justin Amash called for an audit of the Republican National Committee after it seated delegates from states with a great deal of support for Ron Paul at the edges of the convention. The Houston Chronicle even made the observation, quote, "Delegates from the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and the Northern Marianas Islands got better seats than Ron Paul supporters. None of those places, none of those U.S. possessions have electoral votes." According to a convention seating chart obtained by Politico, the delegations from Nevada, Louisiana, Maine, Minnesota, and Oklahoma all were located on the outer fringe of the convention floor because they didn't want the Ron Paul supporters to be able to cheer together and coordinate together. The powers that be in the GOP, which stands for Grand Old Party, but I can think of a lot of other things for which it could stand, which I can't say on the radio, and Romney's campaign have seen to it that Paul supporters are denied a place on the convention floor, even though Paul does have 5 states, Louisiana, Oregon, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, and Maine, which are enough to grant him official recognition on the floor. Convention rules permit a candidate who controls 5 state delegations to make a motion on the floor, but Romney's lawyers successfully stripped away a bunch of Paul's delegates, therefore limiting the power of the Paulistas' supporters to seek or amend the party platform or to nominate Paul. Now, Rand Paul did get to speak because he is more acceptable to the GOP than his father. And I will not condemn him for that because one of the big problems with libertarians, which is why I always qualify myself, I don't just say, okay, I'm a libertarian, is because too many libertarians I know in the United States and in Great Britain, unless they can get it all, they'll settle for nothing. They would rather whine about it. Rand Paul is a solid constitutionalist, While he's less ideologically libertarian than his father, he thus makes himself more acceptable to the Republican Party. He also seems to be smart enough to not make the perfect the enemy of the good. In many ways, he reminds me of a young Ronald Reagan. In an interview a few days ago, he noted the successes of the pollista movement in the Republican Party and suggested that the GOP could begin to win places it had previously given up as perpetual blue states with a more liberty-minded message. He, in fact, said, I think a big part of the libertarian or Ron Paul Republicans is that I think they can help the Republican Party. There are many places in New England as well as California where we're not winning statewide races because it's very difficult for traditional Republicans to win. So I think embracing and bringing these liberty-minded, Constitution-minded people and making them an integral part of the party is a way we might start winning races where we're not winning races. Romney must be getting the message. As he said, Bernanke's gone. There's even talk at this convention about a gold standard. He says, we're really excited about the legacy and influence that his father's had not only in the party but on the platform. Audit the Fed. The bill his father's been working on for years. It passed the House, and every Republican voted for it, and 100 Democrats did too. Now, as Rand Paul said, we just need that scumbag, Finzer's words, not Rand Paul's words, Harry Reid, to let us have a vote on it. But it's part of the platform. And Romney has also come out in support of auditing the Fed as well. Of course, there's all kinds of limitations. Rand Paul's bill requiring warrants for drones is in the platform as well. So did the constitutional requirement that Congress must declare war even though the president is commander-in-chief. Without the obvious brokered deal between the Polistas and the Romneyites, the platform would be much farther to the left and much more pro-big government. But, and this is a huge but, this is a but bigger than Roseanne Barr's butt. A president is not bound by his party's platform once he's in office. So everything the Polistas dream about could well go up in smoke. But interestingly, the one thing is, Rand Paul barely acknowledged that Romney existed during the convention speech. He talked about other things that were really important, which does not include Mr. Romney. Rand Paul may not have been the biggest name to headline the Republican National Convention, but he certainly received the largest standing ovation of the night in the early going of the speeches. We'll be back to talk a little bit more about other things political in just a minute. Well, we're back. You know, I just had a thought that is going to annoy some people, and I apologize for that. If they're annoyed, I don't apologize for the thought. This election is singular in that it is the first election in American history in which neither major candidate is a Christian. Barack Hussein Obama II is a Muslim, and Mr. Romney is a Mormon. While Mormons claim to be Christian, they are not, as Christians historical Christians, Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, understand it, because they do not believe in the Trinity. Now, that doesn't make them bad people, but it does mean they're not Christian. Now, to those Mormons who hear this and want to get very upset, your religion comes back and says that my faith and the Protestant Church and the Catholic Church, that we are all, in fact, heretics because we strayed from the true path when Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. So I'm sorry, but I am merely pointing out to you what you have been telling people ever since Joseph Smith discovered those tablets that no one else really saw. So I think that's just sort of singular that for the first time at this crucial time in American history, we have a president who, we have no major party candidate running for president who is a Christian. And I think that's troublesome. Now, speaking of troublesome, on Sunday, Ellen Barkin entertainment person, expressed her hope that Tropical Storm Isaac would smash up the Republican convention in Tampa and drown all of its delegates. You know, the great thing about the Democrats is every time the Republicans do something stupid and I pick on, the Democrats do something worse that I get to pick on, so it always adds fun. She retweeted the message from one of her followers, who's obviously a twit. Come on, Isaac, wash every pro-life, anti-education, anti-woman, xenophobic, gay-bashing, racist SOB right into the ocean. Barkin did not express any disagreement in her retweet. Now imagine if that had been written by a Republican, a conservative, about the pro-baby killing, pro-government education, anti-family, diversify in insane, pro-gay marriage people in the Democratic Party. The mainstream media would have gone wild. It would have been at the top of the news. But people didn't hear about it because when the left says stupid things, I guess they're expected to. Now, I got to go back to the Republican Party again because there's other stuff that went on that needs to be reported. The Republican Party officials were up working late Monday night trying to avoid a messy convention floor battle, not just with supporters of Ron Paul, but in fact traditional conservatives like one of my old enemies, Morton Blackwell, the national committeeman from Virginia. I don't like Morton one damn bit, and I'm sure the feeling is mutual, over a change in the rules where they were trying to take away all the power of the party at large and give it to the national committee. They were trying to let them just do whatever they wanted. It was sort of like a Republican version of Obama getting to do whatever he wants in killing people and having them arrested, etc. It was a smaller scale. This was within the party. But what I worry about is if the leadership of the Republican Party is willing to try to do that within its party, how does it show itself morally different than Barack Hussein Obama? Now, the Paul campaign has always tried to be civil. And it said that while it was continuing to review the changes, and apparently the deal's gone through, under the agreement, a bound candidate must vote for the presidential candidate they are required to vote for under state law or state party rules, but that leaves the actual selection of delegates up to the states. The previous proposal would have given presidential candidates the power to veto delegates sent by the state, a charge that Ron Paul supporters and other middle ground establishment Republican and conservative leaders opposed. Now, the bottom line is it also violates federal law, which says that a delegate to vote for president in a national convention or an elector cannot be bound. So, you know, this is just one more of those nasty things that goes on inside the party that no one wants to talk about but needs to be talked about. Now, while this was all going on, of course, they were also having what they used to call, when I was in Washington, a sheep shearing session. That's when you get a bunch of high-powered elected officials, in this case, Senator Cornyn, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Orrin Hatch, Bob Corker, John Barroso, Ron Johnson, Jerry Morgan, Roy Blunt, and John Kyle having a meeting with the rich men of the party, the big donors, to see how much they can strip out of their pocket for the National Senatorial Committee. Now, of course, the NRSC has said they won't commit any resources to Missouri unless Todd Akin withdraws from the race. We're back to that again, and they're still beating on this man and beating on him. U.S. Representative Todd Akin's campaign released the news release Tuesday attacking RNC Chairman Priebus for declaring that Aiken's Senate campaign will not receive any help from the Republican Party. They would rather look politically correct than win the election. And he still has a chance to win. Aiken's a 6-term Republican from St. Louis County. Now, he didn't use the clearest possible choice of words during a television interview when he said women who were victims of legitimate rape rarely got pregnant. He should have said forcible rape or a real rape, but he didn't, and they blew that entirely out of proportion. And the Republicans are piling on. But you know what? Aiken is challenging a Democratic incumbent, U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, who's seeking her second term, and McCaskill's on record supporting partial birth abortions, when they let the baby start to be born and then stick a vacuum tube into its skull and suck out its brain and kills it, which makes the worst possible misinterpretation of Aiken's statement seem mild by comparison. The good thing is a lot of the donors were not buying it. One donor said they thought they could win anyway. A lot of other attendees showed support for Aiken, so they may send money to Aiken directly instead of just through the party committee, and they should, because Aiken deserves it. He didn't do anything wrong, and the person he's opposing is is evil. But Todd Aiken is a man of principle, and I applaud him for not stepping down. But stay tuned, and when we come back, we will continue to talk. This is David Finzer, and you may be wondering, why am I talking in detail about all of these things? Why am I talking about what's going on behind the scenes? Why is this not a version of headline news? Well, first of all, because it's not headline news. Secondly, because I don't think most people understand what really goes on in the political world, which is why they're fooled and why we have clowns like Barack Obama and Mitt Romney as the candidates of the two major political parties. And so I intend to continue, as long as I'm on the air anywhere, to pick apart all of their foibles, left, right, center, to expose every lie I can, to explain every bit of dissimulation that I can, based on 8.5 years in Washington and being politically active pretty much for 48 years, I guess now, so that you can perhaps understand a little bit better and make an intelligent choice. You know my opinions. I don't try to hide my opinions. I'm not like CBS or NBC or ABC or CNN or the so-called no-spin zone. I admit that everything I'm saying, I have a point of view, but I will do my best to tell the truth and then tell you what I think about it. And so that's why you get the stories you do from me. Now, the House Republicans are in a good position to retain control, just like the House, the Republicans are in a good position to gain control of the Senate. The House Republicans are in a better position probably to keep control of the House. Speaker John Boehner on Monday said that Republicans are in a strong position to retain their majority in the House and could even expand it. Now, this is a big change from his just dire warnings in April that Democrats had a 1 in 3 chance of regaining control of the lower chamber. Now, I'll bet you, however, that was in a fundraising letter that went out to millions of people around the country saying, if you don't donate, the Democrats are going to take over, because that's the way you write fundraising letters. When I ran a foundation in Washington, I had to write them, and they usually made me sick to my stomach. I used to fight with the marketers all the time and try to find a compromise in a fundraising letter that would still raise money and keep me from, and allow me to still look at myself in the mirror. But now he, of course, is building things up, because now they're trying to create what they call the big momentum. So he says we're in a strong position to keep our majority and, frankly, to try to expand it. He said that in Tampa at a luncheon sponsored by the Christian Science Monitor, another one of my favorite papers for very delicately slanting the news to make it fit their point of view. But independent political handicappers believe the chances are slim to none that Democrats could pick up the 25 seats needed to gain a majority that they lost in 2010. But the odds of the House Republicans expanding its majority are small, according to the same crystal ball gazers. Some predict Democrats will cut into the GOP majority but fall short of the 25 needed to actually take control and appoint a speaker. Over the past few weeks, the speaker has sounded more confident in his party's chances to pick up seats because he's been barnstorming for scores of GOP candidates across the country, raising $4 million at 47 events, and you don't raise $4 million by saying, hey, this guy's going to lose. I don't know why they're doing that to Todd Akin, but they are. But the rest of the cases, he's saying we're going to win. Now, I got this piece from the conspiracy theory right. And this is not Finzer's opinion. This is just something that some of the people who I think wear tin hats are thinking about. Now that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has turned down Obama's offer to replace Vice President, which we don't know, but is speculation, and who wouldn't want to replace Vice President Joe Biden, preferably with someone who is a deaf mute, and is left with but one move to win re-election and remain president will cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Had Hillary switched with Biden, Obama would have had a chance to win the election, these people say. Obama is watching the presidency slip away from him, these people say. Now the only avenue to victory, according to these people, left him is to start a war. He won't want it to end too quickly, as it has to last at least until the election and seem like it can last longer. And they're claiming that about a month before the election, the famous October surprise, and then attack Iran. More likely, they say, he'll do so by attacking Israel and creating a high death toll and leave Iran's fingerprints on the attack. That will officially draw the United States into the conflict, during which Obama can allow the United States allow for as much death and destruction to rain on Israel as he can possibly manage. The Israelis, of course, will fight back and will be on the verge of World War III. He can do all this while sending unarmed American observers or soldiers without ammunition or permission to engage the enemy in the area to be killed and kidnapped, and thus satisfy his Muslim Brotherhood counterparts, they say. Now, I don't say that. I don't believe it's true, but it's incredible. First of all, I think Obama is capable at least of thinking about it. I don't think he would do that, but I do think there's a chance that Benjamin Netanyahu, as I've talked about, is likely to strike at Iran before the election, because he knows that after the election, and if Obama's reelected, the United States will not back him, whereas Russia will back Iran. So we're back almost to a Cold War situation with proxy wars again. That was ugly during Vietnam and Korea and Laos and Cambodia and Tupamaro guerrillas in Uruguay and all kinds of things. And there's still people like the Sandinistas and FARC around that would just love to have someone to back them to start things all over again. Now, to totally change the subject just to something that is more important perhaps on a business level, Carl Levin, who has been the evil, the wicked witch of the West regarding any international privacy or any international transactions, now wants to remove all corporate privacy in the United States. As you know, many states, the primary states being Delaware, Wyoming, Florida, Nevada, and even the District of Columbia, allow for a high degree of privacy in their corporate entities. Levin has introduced a bill, the Incorporation Transparency and Law Enforcement Assistance Act, that would take away all that. And under that act, which would require regulate all formation agents, require all kinds of information on every new company. Further, this is so bad, even the ABA, the American Bar Association, opposes it. Of course, they oppose it because under the provisions that would regulate, it would regulate law firms as financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act. Now, that's one of the biggest joke names in America. The Bank Secrecy Act means the only one who has any secrecy is the government, not you. And this would make lawyers subject to new federal anti-money laundering laws, combating the financing of terrorism, suspicious activity reporting requirements, and would destroy attorney-client privilege for any attorneys that formed a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, a trust, or anything else for their clients, and it's a really, really bad law. Now, we did get a good win, I think, in Texas. A U.S. Texas appeals court ruled on Tuesday that Texas can cut off funding to affiliates of Planned Parenthood for a state women's health program because the network of clinics provides abortions. Now, Planned Parenthood, of course, is going wild because what Planned Parenthood means is they really want to kill as many unborn babies as possible. And while they deny the money to some of its affiliates supports abortions, what they do is they take it out of one pocket and put it in another. The money they get from the government, they use for other things, for administrative things, for condoms, for whatever, and then that leaves money free for them to use to kill babies. The ruling on Tuesday reversed a lower court decision that had temporarily allowed Planned Parenthood to continue receiving funding under the Texas program. But the sovereign state of Texas has said, we're not going to have it in our state. We don't want it. No, and the judge has agreed. We appreciate the court's ruling and will move to enforce state law banning abortion providers and affiliates from the Women's Health Program as soon as possible, according to Texas Health and Human Services Commission spokesman Stephanie Goodman. Well, we're at the end of the top of the first hour, and I will be back after the news with my European co-host, and we will talk about the Frankenstein's monster that is the European Union project. I'll be back in a few minutes with Ollie Neville. See you then. This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, here in the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River in Serbia on my 5,251st day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To join our conversation, you can call toll-free from the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-888-2292, or for the terminally timid, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Also, don't forget to check out our Facebook, Justin TV, and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the U.S. debt clock, which the Republicans have stolen from me, the idea, the total U.S. national debt right now sits at $15,992,741,000,000 bucks, $51,000 give or take per citizen, $140,000 per taxpayer. Again, reminding you that means 49.5% of the people don't pay taxes. Of course, the GDP is lagging behind, and the total U.S. debt, when you add everything together, is a ridiculous $57 trillion. The U.S. is busted, and nobody wants to admit it, just like I'm sure Ollie will tell us that the EU is busted. And speaking of Ollie, since today is Threatening Thursday, of course, my European co-host, Oliver Neville, from the United Kingdom Independent Party and Young Independents, is here to help us understand the Frankenstein monster and what's going on in the UK and also in Europe. I'm still one of those old-style people who talk about Europe and the UK as being two separate places. I remember when we used to be in the UK and say, we're going to go over to Europe. Anyway, hello, Ollie. How are you?
I'm very well, David. How are you feeling?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the show, and I'm sure you will have something enlightening to say. Our first topic has to do with houses. George Monbiot, you're going to have to tell me who he is.
Monbiot.
Monbiot. Oh, of course. It's one of those French names. Okay, so I definitely want to mispronounce it on purpose. The darling of the environmental movement has recently thrown himself into the debate on housing. That's right, housing. Monbiot, whatever, argues that rich people are greedy and own unnecessarily large houses, and that the housing stock as a whole is a common good, and as such the government should impose huge taxes on those that have spare rooms to force them to take in lodgers, and so ease the burden of the housing shortage. Monbiot opposes building more houses because it damages the environment. Well, thank God I'm not in Britain, since I have around 500 square meters or over 5,000 square feet in my house, and you've been here, Ollie. You know I've got tons of bedrooms and everything. I'd be in deep sheep dip, wouldn't I?
You'd be paying an awful lot of taxes, David. And I mean, Monbiot really puts the mental back into environmental. I mean, he's one of these Guardian left-wing journalists who sort of preach common good, do as I say, not as I do. I mean, he makes these assertions that rich people buy bigger houses bigger than they need, and that we should tax these people. And I think what the really scary point is that he says that the total housing stock is a common resource, that somehow the sum of all privately owned things can be some sort of societal good. I mean, this really reminds me of some sort of Atlas Shrugged dystopic society where we just keep on talking about the social welfare, the common good, and we use it to justify taking away private property from individuals, as he's doing here.
Wasn't that how parties have been getting elected for years?
Well, I mean, none quite so blatant now. It's scary that he thinks that he can so blatantly come out and say this, and that it's a mildly acceptable idea. I mean, there's just apart from the point that obviously it's an evil idea, he hasn't even researched his idea, because the under-occupied homes that he keeps on talking about, which he just says must be owned by the rich, actually most of them are in areas of the southwest and the East Midlands in Britain, where there is abundant housing, where the rich people don't live. So he's got his facts wrong as well, but it doesn't stop him. It doesn't stop these sort of left-wingers who just keep on, throwing out their bile and their hatred of private property and their hatred of any sort of market system. And you're just using it to justify basically totalitarianism. It's shocking.
Well, it's. If I want a big house and I want to pay for it, I should be able to. It creates jobs. It raises the rates that I would pay because the total value of the house is more. So I pay for it, and why is it his business?
Absolutely. And the really ironic thing, David, is that he has 2 spare rooms in his bedroom, and he's not letting them out. It's do as I say, not as I do.
So how can you spell hypocrisy? I guess the new spelling is Monbiot. Anyway, when we come back, we have more to talk about on what's going on, and we'll talk about maybe housing, taxing the rich, etc. This is David Finzer with Ollie Neville for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, we're back, and my co-host today is Ollie Neville from the United Kingdom, who is going to talk us through all the funny doings in the United Kingdom and Europe. And we had just talked about this crazy eco-Nazi, I guess he qualifies as that, who wants to tax people who have extra bedrooms, but he isn't the only one that wants to tax. Apparently, Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister has suggested, and of course, you know what government suggestions mean, do it or we put you in jail, that the UK's wealthiest people could be asked. The British are always so polite about it. I mean, I wonder, do they have nicely colored guns or something when they come for you? To pay more tax for a limited period. The Deputy Prime Minister said to remain cohesive and prosperous as a society, those of, quote, very considerable, unquote, wealth should contribute more. He added that greater fairness was part of a, quote, longer economic war. Well, it's clearly a long economic war, which is to take from those who have made it, those who've worked hard and do it, and give it to those who haven't.
Absolutely. The whole concept of economic war, I mean, it invokes this language. I just want to focus on, just brief, at first, this word temporary tax. Already the Nick Clegg's deputy, the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, Simon Hughes, has said that this temporary tax should last for at least 4 years on, quote, obscene wealth inequality. Now, lest we forget, income tax started as a temporary tax. That's how they suck you in. They say, we just want a temporary tax. We just want to take from you just for a limited period while we fix out some problems. Then it's all going to go away. And suddenly, this temporary tax you're facing becomes permanent, and then they're talking about more taxes.
Well, Ollie, let me tell you something to just prove your point. The income tax in the United States, when it was first brought in the early 1900s, was 1% on all incomes over $100,000 a year.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as they get their foot in the door with legitimizing their tax, they just wedge it open further and further, and suddenly, before you know it, then it just becomes, you have whole generations being born into this, seeing it as a normal tax, and then they try and bring in more tax. And this idea of Nick Clegg's is on top of further taxes the Lib Dems have suggested. They want tycoon tax on people with expensive houses. They want other taxes around. The problem is that we have a spending problem in the UK, not a tax problem. I mean, between 1996 and 2008, average government spending as a proportion of GDP was about 38.8%. Last year, it was 45.8%. To contrast, in tax receipts between 96 and 08 were 37.5% of GDP. Last year, they were 37.6% of GDP. So tax has stayed the same. We don't have a tax problem. We're taking the same amount of tax as we always did. We're spending far too much. The government never wants to cut down on its spending. It never wants to, loosen, stop its projects. It wants the population to contribute more and more of their money. And if this is a temporary tax, well, it won't fix what we have as a structural problem. And if we can see the graphic that we have, the wealthy already pay huge amounts of tax. That top 1% that the left always complain about, they're paying about a quarter of the income tax. So, the wealthy are paying their, quote, fair share. People aren't skipping this, something they owe the government. And it's just ludicrous that we should keep on throwing taxes at them. The French have tried it. As I'll talk about later, the French are seeing huge exodus of people. Don't do the same thing in Britain.
Well, my attitude has always been the good Lord asks for 10%. The government isn't allowed any more than that.
Well, I always say that, personally, I'm a big fan of thinking that tax is theft. I mean, but that's just my opinion. But in any way, the amount of tax we have, certainly in this country, is so damaging to business, is so damaging to people working, that it's just common sense. If you cut tax a little bit, people will work more, your tax revenue will rise.
Well, even Vladimir Putin figured that out when he took Russia out of bankruptcy by lowering the personal tax rate to 13%, and the treasury filled up.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the great things that Reagan and Thatcher showed is that when you cut taxes, you raise revenue. They are not pursuing their taxes for practical purposes. It is pure ideological warfare against those that produce in our society.
Well, I think it's one more thing than that, though, Ollie. I think it's, since you no longer have rotten boroughs in Britain, it's a new way of buying seats in Parliament by paying off constituencies using government money instead of using private money to buy a seat in Parliament.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much. It's just ridiculous the amount of people that sort of attempted to use government money to sort of almost fund their own re-election by specific projects. I think is it pork barrel spending it's called in America?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that is coming definitely on the rise in Britain, and it's always the way that that when one government gets in, it will do nasty things to the constituencies of the opposition. It will build all its rail lines and, concrete over there and upset them. And in their constituencies, they just lavish them with things. And it happened in Labour, and now the Tories are starting to do it again. It's just back and forth. Who can spend more money on their voters? It's horrific. It's using, tax money, the public's money that they've been forced to give to the government to fund their own sort of re-election. It's just, this is the inherent corruption of politicians.
Well, I would remind you of something that Lady Thatcher said. There is no such thing as public money. It's always the people's money.
Absolutely, absolutely. People very cleverly cover things up with this sort of talk of, as we saw in the previous one, common good and public welfare and stuff. And they forget that we are a society of individuals, a society that obviously individuals get on very well together, and man is a social being, but it doesn't mean that we should be forced to bail out our neighbors.
Right. Well, talking about bailing out our neighbors, it looks like the Eurozone is in crisis again and again and again. Private depositors are fleeing Spanish banks. Catalonia wants a $5 billion special euro rescue for them, which heightens fear of a full country bailout. The ECB figures show Spaniards withdrew €1 for every 20 euros deposited in July. In total, 74 billion euros were withdrawn in July, the biggest monthly drop since the launch of this misbegotten single currency. Total deposits were 1.5 trillion euros at the end of July, down 4.6% from June, and reflecting levels seen as the Greek contagion spreads. So, what's going on?
Well, I mean, Catalonia is just one of half a dozen Spanish regions that have been shut out of markets. People will not lend to them because they are broke, and the only way they can keep on spending in the Spanish regions is through government help. Regions in Spain have a combined debt of around 145 billion euros, and that's 36 billion euros needing to be refinanced this year. And as we said, the markets won't give it to them. They have to get it from the Spanish federal government, which doesn't have the money. So it looks like the ECB is going to try and bail out Spain, massively buy up bonds in Spain, because the markets won't lend to Spain either at any sort of sustainable rate. So this is just huge amount of Greek contagion that started in Greece, and that is a fundamental flaw of the Euro project and the Euro itself. I mean, if we look at Spain's neighbour, Portugal, just looking back at what we're talking about tax, its tax revenues fell 3.5% in July. The news reports say despite higher taxes. I'd say because of higher taxes. The EU's advice to all these countries has been raise taxes, and cut your spending. They raise taxes, they get less revenue.
Well, of course. I mean, as a businessman who, with our company, we have people who work for us in various parts of the world, and those places that are most tax-friendly to us is where we have the biggest investments, and those that are the least tax-friendly is where we have the smallest footprint.
Absolutely, and that's that's the EU harming the recovery of their member countries. I mean, another example is Greece. It wanted to launch a Chinese-style economic zones reform plan, special tax and regulatory breaks to attract foreign investment, but that might breach EU free market rules. So the EU is blocking any chance of these countries to fix themselves.
Since when did the EU believe in the free market?
Absolutely, David.
So it's just EU market rules, not EU free market rules. Well,
Yeah.
there's, that's not surprising, and they're doing actually freedom is being taken away right and left. We'll talk about that when we come back after the news and a break, and what they're doing with the internet. Well, we're back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio with my Threatening Thursday co-host, Ollie Neville in the United Kingdom, talking about things that are going on in the UK and Europe. And I guess now we're going to talk a little bit about the naked truth. Labour peer Lord Mandelson. Now, isn't this the same Mandelson who was disgraced a couple of times?
Oh, yeah, multiple times.
When he was in the Labour government?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had the same criminal in mind. Has waded into the row over the naked Prince Harry photos, saying it highlights the potential damaging effect of the internet on society. Mandelson said he believes Prince Harry's privacy was breached by the photos, but the real issue is not about the Sun's defiant decision to print the photos, but the lack of regulation of the internet. Quote, the bigger question is how the domestic media can be made economic and subject to any form of regulation in an era when a click away there is access to information that respects no national boundaries and the laws of no single parliament or the basic standards of conventional journalism. He wrote in a letter to today's Financial Times. He said it is difficult to see a future for newspapers when the internet ransacked their business. Sounds to me like the Luddites all over again.
I was just about to say, David, this is pure Ludditism. It is, there are advances in technology which will mean that some people go out of business, but that's how the market works. Things get better, and so people that are stuck in the old methods either have to catch up or change. And it's ridiculous to be saying that we should sort of try and control the internet to protect some businesses. But I don't think this is really about, protecting those businesses. This is just another government attack on the internet because the government hates the internet. I mean, it just it's the one way of getting information, the government can't control.
Well, I'm sure at least two governments, yours and the United States, would love to have this show off the air.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and there's so much stuff on the internet that the government hates. I mean, you can see how much governments hate the internet. If you look at China, the amount of internet control it attempts, and still, information leaks through, even though they've got, an effective iron curtain on their internet. You can still get information into China and information out of China. I mean, the internet helped all these revolutions in the Arab Spring and whatnot with the ability to communicate. Governments feared the internet, and I think when the internet came about, it was a massive shift of power from governments to people. And ever since, they've been looking for ways and looking for justifications to shut it down.
Well, governments fear free discourse. You're too young to remember. Do you know what Samizdat is? Or
No.
was?
I haven't heard of this one.
Samizdat. These were typed newspapers with the real news that were passed hand to hand, one copy, inside the Soviet Union to get out real news to people because the government controlled all the information.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just, it's so long the government has been used to be able to, exert pressure on newspapers that even though they're private companies, they can still influence their direction. I mean, but now, as we said, with the internet coming on and the ability for anyone to express the truth throughout the whole world, from any corner of the world, you can present the truth to billions of people, and it's scary times if you're one of these totalitarian government employees who want to suppress truth and just push forward, newspeak and the government's truth.
Well, right, and the thing is, the people who will oppose this, the hackers, if you will, I do not believe the majority of them, or even a tiny minority of them, are going to sell out to the government. They're dedicated to their fight for freedom by telling the truth.
Absolutely. I cannot see this being a war that the government can win. I can see it trying to chip away and regulate things, but there is the ability for sort of a black market of information, if you will, on the internet to be created. Every time governments put up barriers or regulations, there will be people who see it as a moral duty to flood a network of information and free information. So I can't see the government winning unless it declares all-out war on the internet and shuts it down. And we've had politicians in Britain saying that the government should be able to shut down the internet if there's social unrest. And I think I heard something from America. They had Obama wanted to have a kill switch on the internet. So, I mean, it's being mooted, and they're trying to get it into the public conscious that it's a good idea if government has this control. And this is a key battle, I think, David. If we lose the internet, we lose everything.
Well, I agree. There's a passage in Scripture with which I'm almost certain you're not familiar, but it's one that says, "For you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And everything that allows the truth to be spread is important, and it should be cherished and guarded. And this is part of freedom of speech. It's part of our common law rights as free men to freely express ourselves and freely communicate. And it is a fundamental right, because otherwise we're locked in.
Absolutely. I mean, there is the internet is the last and the biggest bastion of free speech in our society. And
they can't really do without it. So that's the thing. They are now the big corporation. All the people that are the enemies of freedom also use the internet, and they are so tied into it that they can't really do away with it. So they're trying to figure out ways, of course, to control it. And there are smarter people, because really smart people don't go to work for the government unless they're sociopaths. And so they're stuck. They've created a monster that may just end up destroying them.
Absolutely. And I know that you talk about on Technical Tuesday, when you talk about your how to stay safe on the internet. Now they try and use the internet on to help them to hear about what free people are saying, to spy on us. And while I agree completely, the internet is a force for good. As you said, corporations and the government use it, and so that's why it's so important to listen to your show, David, and to learn how to be safe on the internet and how to use it as just a force for good, not give away anything to the government.
Right, and because there is no escape. But speaking of escapes, we have to move on, and apparently French bankers are escaping the President Hollande. Higher taxes and an anti-business attitude are driving French bankers and high flyers out of Paris and into London, according to recruiters and what we call real estate agents, but in England they're estate agents. Socialist President Francois Hollande's planned 75p top tax rate, 75% I presume, top tax rate, was the flagship policy in his election campaign, but instead of raising cash from the super rich, it's going to simply drive them abroad. Now, Ollie, you've got about 20 seconds, 10, 15 seconds to make an initial remark, and then we'll continue when we come back.
Well, a London-based recruitment firm has just said that 51% rise in French language applicants. They're leaving France. They're running.
Wow. And they want to leave La Belle Francais for Albion. That's probably good for, I don't know, that's letting an awful lot of undesirable aliens in. Anyway, Ollie and I will be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. And we're back at our last segment at the top of the hour, and Ollie and I were talking about the French who were bailing out of France because of higher and higher taxes, and moving to the United Kingdom, where the taxes are still high, but just not quite astronomical yet.
Absolutely. As I was saying before we left, London-based recruitment firm Asprey Marsden, which specialises in the banking sector, has seen a 51% rise in French language applicants in recent months compared to last year. I mean, their managing director said that there's been a definite spike in French-speaking candidates, and that they haven't seen similar increases in candidates from other countries. So, I mean, I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, saying that there's probably going to be a big rise in French people moving to London from France. I mean, we've already gone from something like London being France's 8th largest city to the 6th largest city. That's only going to get bigger. And this is going back to what I've been saying all throughout today's program. When you raise taxes, the super wealthy and even the quite wealthy either avoid them or just get out and completely leave. So, the Hollande came in a big rush of, we're going to tax the wealthy, big populist mantra of, they got us in the crisis, we'll make them pay. And it just doesn't happen. I mean, you have to be sensible in today's globalized economy. If you want to raise any sort of tax revenue, You've got to keep taxes low. You've got to keep taxes simple. You can't try and, for political reasons, aggressively tax anyone, because the only person you're going to hurt is yourself.
Well, there is a statement that I can't quote, but I'll paraphrase, attributed to Winston Churchill in favor of offshore tax havens, because he said they act as a safety valve, and if you close the safety valve and don't let people shield some of their money from taxes, they will just leave. And of course, in the 60s, 70s, there was a huge brain drain from the United Kingdom because it tried to do that, and now it's happening again. You know, if you take the most successful people and tax them to death, they are smart enough to go someplace else.
Absolutely, and I mean it's shown not just in individuals but businesses as well. I mean, Ireland has the lowest corporation tax in the European Union. Luxembourg also has very low taxes on businesses. So many companies base themselves, you know, they won't base themselves in Britain. They'll base themselves in Ireland and do business with us from there. They don't pay taxes. The jobs all go to the Irish people working there. And you get people on the left who just go, these people need to be made to pay more taxes, clamp down on them, and you think, what are you talking about? If you start clamp down on them even more, they won't even be providing their services to Britain.
Well, what do you think of this, Ollie? I maintain that the simplest, fairest tax is just simply a sales tax, period, because the rich tend to consume more than the poor. They would pay vastly more in taxes, and then people could control the taxes they paid by the number of the things they bought.
Absolutely. I mean, it's taxes like that where I'd still, not be in favour of taxing people, but those are much better taxes because they're almost voluntary. I mean, you pay tax based on if you decide to consume more. That's why, I mean, I've heard possible arguments for land value taxes as opposed to income, as opposed to jobs tax, as opposed to corporation taxes, because, if you choose to buy more expensive housing, then you can, pay, I mean, if you're thinking about a minarchist society, you're paying for that property to be defended by, and depending on the size of the property, you pay more because, you need more defended. So I'm more in favour of those more voluntary taxes than because tax is just, it's a disincentive. And if you tax business, you disincentivize business. If you tax income, you disincentivize earning money. And people don't get that.
Well, it's obvious that this is spreading around the world. The Red Chinese, who have been pretty smart about a lot of economic things. Of course, when you don't have any opposition, it makes it easier. But apparently, the entrepreneurial, well-connected, are just plain corrupt. It doesn't matter how they made their fortunes. There's mounting evidence to show that China's super rich are heading for the exit. More and more rich Chinese businessmen are seeking residency in the United States, of all places, through investment.
Absolutely. One of the things here, the key factor is that when the insiders leave, there's really a problem. And people have been investing in China and say that China's, growing, it can never stop growing. And the people that are really in the know, the people that own the businesses in China, the people that know the politicians or work for the government, they're the ones that are getting out of China in their droves. Because China is, China's at a peak, and I think you can argue about it, but a lot of people are starting to, think that China's not going to carry on growing. Its growth is down. Official figures are very debatable. Official inflation is much lower than what people actually think it is. And that the Chinese regions, like we saw in Spain, while the government might not be too indebted, the regions are in huge amounts of debt. They spent so much money creating like these perfect cities, which now no longer have anybody wants to buy in them. No one, so they just have basically ghost towns across China. And China was mooted as this growing, threatening economic superpower. And I think it really could go one of two ways now. I mean, America and Britain are definitely on the decline. China could overtake them, could assert global dominance in economics, but it also could collapse. It could go down because, it is for all the economic reforms it's had, it's still a centrally planned economy. They're desperately trying to manipulate their currency to boost exports, but that gives them huge amounts of debt. And they're struggling, David. And I think that while they try and mask it with fake figures, the people in the know are leaving, and that's when you really should get scared.
Well, one of the other things that concerns me, I'm a little perhaps more security conscious. Maybe it's my Cold War mentality.
Yeah.
But this EB-5 visa plan, which investment for residency, hands out green cards to red Chinese as long as the investment can be shown to have created at least 10 jobs. Now, China has had a long policy of stealing proprietary information, has stealing patents, not obeying patent laws, etc. What a great way to get lots of agents in place, if you think about it, because anybody who's made that much money in China, very few of them are entrepreneurs. They are people who are party officials, because all the industry in China is run by the party or the People's Liberation Army.
Absolutely.
So these are not the poor huddled masses yearning to breathe free, wanting to come to China. These are the rich, privileged communists wanting to get inside the United States. A, maybe to squirrel money away there, but B, maybe to take out of the United States a lot more than they put in.
Well, absolutely. America has been, I think, is very naive towards China. It's been, spending more than it can take in from the government. The government's been selling debt to China willy-nilly, and it's huge. Most U.S. debt, I think, is held by China. Now they're trying to get Chinese people in to invest here, as you say, relying more on China, possibly Chinese taking their information. But there's a huge reliance on China, and I don't think many Americans realize how much influence China has towards the U.S. government because of the amount of money it has, in America.
Well, it dictates to a great extent, it dictates American monetary policy, because the red Chinese hold the debt. Now, the bad thing is that we did it to ourselves by selling out Free China, Taiwan, which 20 years ago, it held the biggest amount of American debt, and we sold Free China down the river, and the people in Taiwan, or the Republic of China, which I call Free China, they are 40 times more productive per person than the people in Red China.
Absolutely. This is the problem with the short-termist politicians that we have, both here and in America. They think, I'll just take a bit more money to spend on my pet projects here. I don't want to change taxes because I don't want to lower taxes, but I don't want to increase them either because I don't want to annoy people, so I'll borrow it of China. And, but they never have to pay it back because the politicians aren't liable for the money they borrow on our behalf. It's us who has to pay it back, but we're being held indebted to the Chinese because of the short-term, arrogant thinking of our politicians who think that they know better than we do. They know how to spend money better than us.
And
so
we're down to our last 30 seconds. If Red China and Putin's Russia make a detente between them, it's going to be a really scary world.
And it will be our own fault, David. It will be our politicians' fault.
We will have done it. That's correct. Thank you, Ollie. It's been another great hour with you, and it's been another good show, I think. Remember, you only have 3 choices: give up, fight back, or get out.